Welcome back. Former White House official Lisa Curtis believes Trump administration paused the reciprocal tariffs because the strategy backfired. Curtis was part of the first Trump administration, and she spoke to me on the trade strategy of the Trump administration and the mood inside the White House as well.
Well, I think the goal of the Trump administration is to bring manufacturing back to the United States. This is something that Trump was committed to on the campaign trail. So, it's not surprising that he is putting a lot of effort into bringing manufacturing back, bringing jobs back to the United States. I think the problem is how the tariffs were rolled out, and the fact that not only has he targeted U.S. adversaries, particularly China, but he has also levied tariffs on allies and partners, including some allies that the U.S. had a trade surplus with. So it hasn't made a lot of sense to people why he would do these broad tariffs on so many nations, including allies and partners. And I think it did backfire, and that's why he has stepped back and he's put on this 90-day moratorium. So, unfortunately, I think that the way the tariffs were rolled out, there didn't seem to be a good strategy in place, and it seemed like a haphazard approach to applying tariffs, across the board, across the world. And it badly backfired on him. So there may be, a lesson learned here. But right now, of course, the tariffs are still on with China, and the U.S. and China are virtually in a trade war. And so the question is, how will this impact the U.S. economy? And I think we've yet to see, how it will all play out for the average U.S. consumer.
Right. Lisa, it's quite clear that Donald Trump is using trade as a weapon and trade as a centerpiece of foreign policy relations with other nations. Yes, the tariffs have been paused, and you're saying that it's clear that somewhere the administration realized that the policy is backfiring. But this was long coming. Since his campaign, he has been saying that he will apply reciprocal tariffs, and the world has been very unfair to America. This was in the plan for the last 2 to 3 months. What do you think made the administration realize that, hey, we've made a mistake and we need to pause?
Well, I think one of the main reasons that we're seeing these tariffs in such a, over focus on tariffs, it's really, a one-track strategy. If you ask me, there is probably a broader strategy, a broader economic strategy, if you really want to bring manufacturing back to the United States, that you can't just rely on tariffs. But, unfortunately, I think, his advisors, people like Peter Navarro, who, has been all tariffs all the time, he's written books about it. I think that, he has influenced President Trump. And that's why we saw the disagreement. I think, over the weekend, Elon Musk was very clear that he disagreed with this strategy, and he wanted to see the U.S. negotiating. And, I think it's good that he came out and gave another perspective to this Peter Navarro pro-tariff perspective. So, in that case, I think some of the infighting within the Trump administration played out in a way that helped the United States in the end, because it did, finally lead President Trump to back off on our, tariffs across the board, even against our allies and partners. So, in a way, it was a course correction, and I think we can just hope that, there was some learning there, and that we'll see a better thought out strategy, rather than just, thinking you can disrupt the entire system, overturn the tray and hope for the best. That's not really how one should go about achieving your goals and objectives.
Right. In the first Trump administration, we had seen a lot of high-level exits. People who did not get along with Donald Trump were fired. Do you see a repeat of that? Do you think the current infighting in the Trump administration is worse than what it was earlier?
I do. I think that this time around you have individuals who have individual agendas, and they are bringing these to the fore, and there is a lot of different camps. You know, you have the camp that is very focused on domestic issues and wants to take a more isolationist view toward foreign policy. This camp is, almost anti-Europe. They aren't interested in seeing those traditional alliances preserved, not really remembering why we have those alliances in the first place, the whole history of World War II, how these alliances have kept the peace largely all these years, how we share values with our European allies. That crowd just is ignoring that. The second crowd are more the traditional foreign policy people. I would put Michael Waltz, Marco Rubio in that camp, and they have been supportive of our traditional alliances. They are interested in competing with China. And then you have another category, which would be the pro-business, the tech giants, the business executives who are looking more at the economic piece of this. But even within those three broad categories, you have differences among individuals. And so it is causing a lot of chaos, I think. I think, many of us are hoping that there's some order brought to this process. When I was at the National Security Council, we always tried to have a very deliberate process and to bring the president options. These are the options. This is most likely, what will happen. Of course, the president makes the final decision, but you need to bring informed options. You need to rely on your experts who have been, following the issues, know the issues, and can bring you some very sound policy advice. So hopefully we'll see more of a national security process put in place.
But why is he in a
future.
rush? Why is Donald Trump in a rush in his second term?
Well, I think he knows, he only has, 3.5 more years. He's already had one term in office. According to our Constitution, he can only have 2 terms. So I think he does feel that he needs to make some of these big changes that maybe he didn't have the opportunity to do the first time around. But, he also has said he wants to be known for being a peacemaker. I think this is very important to him, is trying to show that he can, really make this a more peaceful world. But unfortunately, I'm seeing some contradictions. The whole peace through strength idea won't be played out if the U.S. abandons Ukraine, if Russia is able to use military might, to change borders. I don't think that bodes well for a peace through strength legacy for President Trump.
Right. My final question to you would be about China. U.S. has paused reciprocal tariffs, but kept them on China and increased it to 145%. That is the latest clarification. China is retaliating. How bad is this for world security, and how could China take advantage of the global situation?
Well, I think that the developing trade war between the U.S. and China will be harmful to the global economy. It's going to hurt the economies of both the United States and China. And, sort of who suffers more, we've yet to see. But I think, once the American consumer starts to really feel the bite of these tariffs, I think you're going to see a great deal of pushback. The U.S. is a democracy, so people aren't going to hold back in terms of their complaints to the Trump administration. So that I think, let's watch that space and see what happens. But the second part of your question, I think, is very relevant, because as the U.S. is pulling back on foreign assistance, implementing tariffs against its allies and partners, it's going to lose that soft power that has served it well in the past. And I think that the vacuum that the lack of U.S. foreign assistance and sort of benevolence being shown to other parts of the world, particularly the global South, China is going to be the beneficiary of that. There's going to be a vacuum, and China will step in. So in that respect, I think the U.S. does suffer in its overall strategic competition with China. I think that soft power element to the competition with China is important. Right. And unfortunately, the U.S. is going to lose out on that as it sort of pulls back from its engagement with the global South and partnering with countries.
All right, so this is the big concern that Lisa Curtis, a former White House official, is expressing, that with these tariff wars, what U.S. is doing, it's emerging as an unreliable partner. It is ceding the soft power space position that it has enjoyed in the world, and it is China which is keen to grab that position. On that note, we take a short break, and that will be the end of Global Eye. Keep watching CNBC TV18.